Hi everyone, my name is Serena. Welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about all of the books that I read from September till now. So the rest of the books that I read for this year, which are a lot. I'm pretty sure I read 39 books in these 4 months, but I'm not going to talk about all of them. I did complete my Goodreads goal of reading 68 books. So how I determine how many books I want to set as my goal on Goodreads is whatever record I have, I just set it one book higher. So the most books that I've ever read ever was 67. So I set it as 68 this year, and I did that. I read exactly 68 books. So my goal for next year on Goodreads is to read 69, but I do not pressure myself to complete this goal. In fact, last year I did not read 68 books. I read much less. Let me start off by telling you about the books that I'm not going to talk about because I have other videos in which I talk about these books. These books are The Nightingale and The Ones We're Meant to Find. I talk about these books in one of my previous vlogs. The vlog is reading the highest and lowest rated books on my Goodreads TBR, and I talk about these in depth, so go watch that if you're interested in my thoughts. The other 3 books that I'm not gonna talk about in this video are Conversations with Friends, My Dark Vanessa, and Educated, because I talk about them in depth again in another vlog. In the reading books that Hilary Duff has read vlog that I made. Let's move on to the first book that I want to talk about today, and that is The Last Word by Taylor Adams. This was one of my most anticipated reads of 2023, and I can't say that I read it. It's a thriller. I really enjoyed Taylor Adams' other book that I read, No Exit. That was really good. I remember just staying up all night reading that. This wasn't as good, but it is good. It's funny. It's about this woman who writes a 1-star review about a very bad book, and then all of a sudden weird things happened and she is getting harassed by this author telling her to take the review down, otherwise things will happen. What I love about this is that, again, it's funny, and most of what happens in this book is to save a dog. That was really fun, and I love that. Some things don't add up, and there are a lot of reveals, and I love reveals, but again, I think I gave this 4 stars. Next book I want to talk about is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. We all know about this book. It's very popular on TikTok and everywhere. I work at a bookstore, and when this became very popular on TikTok, it was always sold out and people were constantly asking for it. So I decided to just borrow it on Libby and read it to see what the hype is about, and I have to say I enjoyed it. I had so much fun reading this. It's not this great fantasy novel. It's a romantasy on the likes of ACOTAR, if you know what I mean. It's just a fun read, you know? It's about this dragon school, this dragon rider school, in which this girl who is very skinny, you know, the skinny small girl trope, and I think she has a disability, so for her entire life she never expected herself to be a dragon rider, but her mom pressures her into being one, and she ends up going to the school to become a dragon rider, and things happen. She meets obviously like more of a bad boy, Rhysand type of boy, and she has her childhood best friend who is more of a Tamlin guy. I don't really like him at all. Also like Gale from Hunger Games, you know, he gives off those vibes. And yeah, it was just super fun. The way that this author told us about the world, info dumped the world building on us, was very interesting, because apparently this character, when she's stressed, she tends to just say out loud facts about the world and about the history of her land, the place where she lives, you know? So that was an interesting choice. Also, Jack Barlow Every time I read about that character, I kept thinking about Jack Harlow. I'm sorry. I kept saying Jack Harlow instead of Jack Barlow. All of the action scenes in general always go over my head. I cannot picture what's actually going on, but I guess the whole relationship thing that was going on between the characters was my favorite part, and that's why I'm giving it 4 stars. Yeah, I think I gave it 4 stars. I'm pretty sure I gave it 4 stars. 4.5 stars. I gave it 4.5 stars. The next 2 books that I read are 2 books by the same author, and they're kind of connected. The author is Fredrik Backman, and I read Britt Marie Was Here and My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry. That's a long title, but I read these 2 books, and they're connected in a way because there is one character in common in both stories. But they're separate stories. You can read them separately. Britt Marie is the story about this older woman. I think she's in her 60s or 50s, and she just has been cheated on by her husband, and she decides that she wants to go to work and try something new with her life. That's amazing. Good for her. Like, all her life she has tended to the needs of her husband, and she hasn't really done anything for herself. So she finally decided to do something for herself, and she becomes a coach for a soccer team. What I've noticed is that Fredrik Backman loves writing about sports. He loves writing about sports, about old people and children. So like, I've noticed there's this common theme, and he does it very well. I obviously loved other books more by him, and it's just a slice of life story. The character is also very snobbish, and I think she has OCD, so she's very unlikable, but as the more you read, the more you understand her, if you know what I mean. The other book, on the other hand, talks about this young girl, this kid whose grandmother died, and she had an amazing relationship with her grandma, and we do see flashbacks of that, but once she dies, she leaves these letters for her granddaughter to give to all of these people, and she treats that as like a fairy tale quest. She really loves Harry Potter, and her grandma always like told her stories, so she's treating this as like a quest, and she gives these letters to these people. Her grandma, again, wasn't very liked, so she wrote all of these letters to all these people, and yeah, it was a cute story. I think I gave both of them like 3 stars. Then I reread The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, and I read this a long time ago, and the only thing I remembered about this is that I loved it for some reason. I didn't remember much about what was going on. Apparently it's about this man who goes back to his hometown in the countryside because someone died, so he goes back for a funeral, and there is this lake at the end of the lane, hence the title, where this girl Letty and her mom and grandmother all lived, and weird things happen. It's a magical realism story, and you don't really know what's going on. At least like I didn't know what really was going on, but for some reason I love this book. It had some really good quotes, and it made me feel things. So 4.5 stars it is still. Next I read Cricket Kingdom, which is the sequel and final book in the duology. It follows what happens in the first book, Six of Crows, and overall I just enjoyed the first one more for some reason. I don't know, but obviously I'm not gonna spoil anything. The ending is very sad, and I think I gave it 4 stars. I'm just glad I completed this, and by the way, as if you know, they have canceled the show, and I just wish they made a 3rd and final season, even if it's just like 5 episodes, you know, to wrap things up neatly. I hate when they leave things unfinished. Oh, and I have the book. I forgot to hold it up for you guys. Next thing that I read was a poem by Elizabeth Acevedo. I'm trying to read all of the works by authors that could potentially be my favorite authors, and Elizabeth Acevedo is one of them. I enjoyed all of her young adult novels, so I read this poem, Inheritance, and it's just a visual illustrated poem about Afro-Latina hair. So it was good and I recommend it. The other book that I read by Elizabeth Acevedo is Family Lore. This is her new adult novel. This was another anticipated reads and I'm glad that I read it this year. And it's her first adult novel. And this is definitely an adult novel because they talk a lot about sexual things. So it's very sexually explicit. This is the story about women mostly. There are men in this family, but you don't really see them much. Once you see a man in this book, you're like, oh right, there are men in this family. You don't really think about them much. It's mostly about these women, these sisters and nieces that have these sort of powers, but it's not a fantasy. It's more of a magical realism situation again. And for example, one of the powers that these sisters have is telling if someone is lying or not, or if they're telling the truth, or one of the main sisters knows when someone is about to die. So this sister in particular reunites the whole family for a reunion of some sorts, and everyone thinks that either she or someone in the family is going to die soon. So that's why she's reuniting everyone. So that is the premise of this book, but it's not all about this sister. We see all different stories about all of the sisters and nieces that have different powers. My favorite is obviously Pastora's power, the one that can tell if you're telling the truth or not. That, between all of them, is the power that I would want. I would want to know if someone is telling the truth or not, you know? But yeah, overall this was good. The more I read it, the more I liked it, so I gave it 4 stars in the end. Also, you can tell that this author really loves her culture. There are a lot of Spanish words in this book, and you can tell. She is Dominican, I believe. Next book is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I finally read this book, and it's about Achilles and Patroclus. Their entire lives since there were children till the Trojan War, I guess. And it's fiction, it's an historical fiction, and it's not the exact same as the legend. Patroclus, for example, in the Greek legend, is a warrior, but in this book he's more of a softie. It is a gay love story, and what I've learned is that in those times, in ancient Greek times, being gay was more accepted than today. The creation of families were mostly like business deals, but you could have done whatever you wanted back then with whoever you wanted to, which is great. I already knew the legend, I already know how the story was going to end, so I didn't get as emotional as I should have, I guess. A lot of people cry at the end of this, but the fact that I already knew what was going to happen didn't make me cry. Yeah, but it was good. It was written very well. I want to read Circe, and I think I give this one 3.5 stars. Also, I'm not a big Greek mythology fan like other people are, so I guess that's another reason why I didn't give it a higher rating. Next book that I read was my first light novel, The Garden of Words by Makoto Shinkai. A light novel is basically the written form of a manga, I guess. And I think this is a manga as well, but it started as an animated film, I think. So it was a film that then became a manga and a light novel, and I read the light novel. This is about so many different stories. Again, it's like a slice of life situation about different characters that come together at the end, but mainly it's about this boy in school and this 27-year-old teacher. So weird vibes. I don't know what is the age of consent in Japan. It's kind of a platonic relationship between these two people. It took me a bit to distinguish the characters and the timeline because Japan has a different school year than the Western world, I guess. So it took me a little bit to figure that out, but overall, I didn't hate it. I think I gave it 3 stars. Almost everyone is an alcoholic, I don't know, that's probably a thing in Japan, I don't know. And every chapter usually has one narrator, but what I found very interesting is one of the chapters have two narrators. They're not specified, but you can tell just by reading it who is talking. And it's also, they're like divided in paragraphs. You can tell who is talking, and I found that very innovating and interesting. Next book is the second book in the Beartown series trilogy. I'm almost done. I only have to read the last one, but overall this one was good. Again, I really like Fredrik Backman. I really loved Beartown more than this, obviously, but overall it was still good. I'm not going to talk about the plot a lot. It just follows whatever happens in Beartown, and it's mostly about two rival hockey teams. Next book that I read in September, we're still in September by the way. I read so much in September. This is the last one that I read. It's Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sepetys. I really enjoyed Salt to the Sea by this author, and I want to read more again by this author because I feel like she could potentially be one of my favorite authors. And I did really enjoy Between Shades of Grey. I gave it 4 stars. It's set during World War II, but it's set in Lithuania and Russia, so we see a different perspective, a different place during that time in the 1940s. So this young girl and her family get separated, and they get sent to Russia in Siberia to work in concentration camps. So it's about that. It's about this girl going through this situation, and yeah, I enjoyed it. Let's move on to October. In October, I participated in Gothtober for the first time. I don't usually read a lot of Gothic books, and my TBR for this month wasn't all Gothic books, but I did read more Gothic books, so that's a win. I didn't complete the entire 10-book TBR, so let me just pull up the picture of my prompts. By Pockrep, for that one I did read a book. I read Mexican Gothic, and that I have to say was my favorite out of the whole TBR that month. I did really enjoy Mexican Gothic. I want to read more by this author. It's about this woman who gets a letter from her cousin who lives in Mexico saying that something wasn't right and she needed help. So she goes to Mexico to figure out what's going on, but she goes there and sees that everything is fine. So it does have Senshin House vibes, and this is a theme this month. I realized that most of the books that I read this month in October were giving Senshin House vibes, and this is one of them. And yeah, overall I really enjoyed it. I think I gave it like 4 or 4.5 stars. Next prompt was to read a book with disability representation, and I think I chose Piranesi for this one because the author has a disability, but I did not read this. I'm gonna read it next year, don't worry. The next prompt is LGBTQ representation, and for that one I read a non-Gothic book. It's Last Night at the Telegraph Club. I enjoyed this one. It's set during the Red Scare in the 1950s in San Francisco. So there was this hatred towards communists and Asian people in particular, and homophobia. And it's also a love story about these two women who find each other in this club. So I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. Fourth prompt was Senshin House, and for this one I read The Shining. I finally read another Stephen King book, and I also watched the movie. They're very different. The ending is very different, and I've heard very not good things about how the director treated especially the main female actress. Overall, this book, I do have it. Where is it? I have it somewhere, but I am not gonna go looking for it. This is a story about Jack Torrance. He's a husband and a dad who finds this job at this hotel as a caretaker. So in the off season he goes there as a caretaker, but weird things happen because apparently this hotel makes you go insane. And I have to say that I enjoyed it. I gave it, I think, 3.5 stars. And I definitely enjoyed it more than Carrie. And if I ever read something else by Stephen King, it's definitely going to be either Pet Sematary and Misery, or I don't know. But those are my top two choices if I ever gonna read something else by Stephen King. Also, the audiobook narrator sounded so much like Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. For the prompt, Head Empty Just Vibes, I read The Death of Mrs. Westaway by Ruth Ware. This is a story about a girl who does tarot card readings, and all of a sudden one day she gets this letter that says she has inherited something by this old lady who died, and she immediately knows that it's a mistake, but since she does have financial problems, she decides to go there and go with it and see what happens. Again, very gothic. It reminded me of Knives Out, the movie. For the prompt empowerment, I did read something. I read another non-gothic book. It's Ace of Spades by Farida Abide Imide. This is a Gossip Girl type of story where this person sends text about two black students' secrets. So it's very targeted. It's about racism as well. So this person is just revealing secrets that these two black people have, and it's a very interesting commentary on some obviously social issues that we have in society, and I enjoyed it. I gave it 3.5 stars again. Next book is a book that haunts you, and it indeed haunted me enough to DNF it. I did DNF A Dance with Dragons by George R.R. Martin. I DNF'd it 40% through, and I just realized that the last time I read a Game of Thrones book was so long ago, and I didn't remember much of anything, so I was lost reading this book, and I just realized that who knows when the author is gonna write the next book. If he ever does decide to continue on with this series, I will reconsider reading this book, and if I don't, I'll just read a summary and see if the ending is different from how the show ended. This just needed a lot of brain power that I did not have at the time, and I just kept getting distracted, so that's it. Plus, I once in a while look up on Google and see if this book is gonna come out anytime soon, and all I see is articles of the author saying to stop pestering him. So I agree, we should just stop. I'm over it by now. Whenever he wants to publish it, good for him. The next prompt was Asian mythology representation, and for this one, again, another non-gothic book, I read Iron Widow. It's a reimagining of the first female emperor of China, I think, and overall this was good. It was 3 stars. It's a sci-fi, and I'm not a sci-fi girly. I liked it enough, I think. There is gonna be a sequel next year. Maybe I'll try it out, we'll see. But it's about this girl, this futuristic setting, obviously, in which women get drafted into becoming concubine pilots, but for some reason, when they go to war, things always happen to the women but not to the men. It's mostly like a duo situation in these planes. It's a man and a woman, and there's always something happening to the woman, never the man, so it's sus. It's a very feminist book. There's a lot of feminine rage, I have to say. You can feel the rage. Last prompt is fairy tale retelling, and for this one I did read a gothic book, and that is The Last Tale of the Flower Bride, and I did enjoy this one, not as much as I wanted to because it was a anticipated read of 2023. I ended up giving it 3 stars. This as well gave Sentient House vibes, but it's not about a sentient house. It's more of a situation in which you are guessing whether or not the main character lives in a magical house setting or if it's all in her head. So it's not a fantasy, it's more of a fairy tale, whimsical gothic story. You know, there is this like magical guarding thing going on, but it's not magical. I don't know, it's weird, it's hard to describe. It is about a toxic friendship. One is very dependent on the other, and the other one is just toxic, bossing her around, telling her what to do. And it is set in 2 timelines. In present day, there's this man who marries this random woman who he doesn't know, but she's very beautiful, and the only thing that she asks of him is for him not to ask her about her past. And her past, the other timeline, is about her and her friend. And I think, don't quote me on this, it's a retelling of Bluebeard, I think. In November, I started off the month with The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse, and this was just a quick, cute read. Loved the illustrations, loved the short film that also won an Oscar, by the way. It's made me cry. It made me cry. I really loved it. A lot of good life quotes, and it made me tear up. It's a cute story for all ages. 5 stars. Then I read Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros, the 2nd book in the 4th Wing series, and I did not like this book. I think I give it 2 stars, but that's probably generous. I did not like it mainly because not much happened in this book, and the writing didn't capture me as much as the first book did for some reason. The world building was weak, and it's divided in part 1 and part 2. In part 1 it's just a lot of repeating scenes. We see the new first years, so we see a lot of things that happened in the first book happen again in the 2nd book. But the thing that frustrated me the most is the relationship between the 2 main characters. They were not communicating, and in my head I was screaming for them to just break up, you know, because they weren't communicating at all. They were just in the same room together, not saying anything, and then all of a sudden in part 2 she starts asking questions, and then he says, oh, you finally decided to ask a question, just communicate please. So yeah, that was frustrating, the whole like relationship. Not much happened, and the ending, there is another cliffhanger, but I didn't care. I feel like a lot of people feel the way that I feel. Also, not everything has to be a huge series. I feel like they got excited because of TikTok and the hype that the first book got, that they wanted to extend the income. Also, it was published 6 months after the first book, and it needed more time. It needed more editing, in my opinion. So, well, let's see. I'll try the 3rd book maybe. But if I don't like that one either, I'm just gonna DNF. The next, I think, 9 books are all children's books. They are the Junie B. Jones books that I haven't read, because I was revisiting my childhood favorites, and Junie B. Jones was always a favorite for me for some reason. This bratty little kid that I loved as a child, and I realized it is a 20-something book series, and I just decided to read all of the books that I didn't read. So yeah, also it helped me reach my goal. So yeah, not gonna talk about them. The next book that I read in November is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F by Mark Manson. So this is a self-help book. I don't really read that, but I kept seeing this everywhere. So I just thought, it's short, let's try it out. And it was a quick read. It was decent. I quickly realized reading this book that I don't know how I feel about self-help books written by men, for me personally, but it was interesting nonetheless. A lot of concepts that a lot of things that he talked about were things that I already knew. So it was just reassurance to me. For example, accepting that life is imperfect and that nothing always goes as planned will make your life so much easier. That feeling out of control in society is normal. Suffering is always a thing in life, so you have to choose what you're willing to suffer for, and be present enjoy what you have now. All of these concepts that I already like knew, but it was reassurance for me, you know? It's very sarcastic, so if you don't have the same sense of humor, you might not enjoy this book as much as other people might with that same sense of humor. Also, I looked it up, and is it gonna be a movie? I saw a random trailer of it, so that was interesting because you never see self-help books get adapted into movies. Another short read is Evidence of the Affair by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I do want to read all of her books, and I haven't yet, but this one is the shortest. I read it and I enjoyed it. I give it 4 stars. It's about these 2 characters, a woman and a man, who send letters back and forth because they find out that their respective husband and wife are cheating with one another. So they talk about it and they form a relationship themselves. It was interesting. The ending was interesting. And it's just a quick read in a letter format. And that's it for November. A lot of short, quick reads in November. Lastly, let's go to December. In December, I mostly read the books that I mentioned at the beginning of the video that I'm not going to talk about. I am only going to talk about Heartstopper Volume 5. I read this in one evening. I love it. I gave it 5 stars. I do love this graphic novel series. It makes me tear up. It makes me cry. I also love the show. And Alice Oseman overall just really depicts being a teenager very well on page. The whole deciding a university, deciding a major, the pressure that society has on you starting from that age. Also the whole first relationship thing, being intimate for the first time. Those are all relatable things that happened in this graphic novel, in this volume, and I loved it. The whole long distance thing was very exaggerated, but I guess it depends on the person. And yeah, that's it. That was a long video. Oh my god, so many books. I shouldn't have kept I should have done another wrap up at some point in these months, but overall, if you're still watching, thank you so much for watching, and Happy New Year. I'll see you next year. And obviously, if you read any of these books, let me know down below, and I'll talk to you in my next video. Bye.